In the deepest silence of Arabia's vast moonlit desert, whispered stories linger of Iram, a city of pillars. A forgotten metropolis said to shimmer just out of reach, beneath the rolling dunes, built by giants and erased by the wrath of the heavens. Legends tell of travelers glimpsing ghostly towers through sandstorms, conquerors and secret agents searching for lost power, and poets who branded it the Atlantis of the sands, a place so dazzling that its very memory teeters between history and mirage. Tonight, we venture beyond these haunting myths, sifting through legends, true explorer diaries, and mysterious ruins in the sand, searching for the heartbeat of a city the world wasn't meant to find. Imagine, if you will, January of 1931. The world is slumbering in the lull between great wars, the air tinged with uncertainty and hope in equal measure. In southern Arabia, the endless desert yawns a golden sea so relentless it is called the Empty Quarter. Rub al-Khali, the largest continuous expanse of sand on earth. The local Bedouin have spent generations learning its temperament and respecting its dangers. Into this desolate domain steps Bertram Thomas, a British civil servant and amateur linguist whose outward calm belied an internal tide of curiosity. Thomas was not a man of spectacle. His ways were neat, movements careful, and words chosen sparingly. After years spent in Oman, his affinity for Arabic and his respect for local customs earned him grudging acceptance in lands wary of outsiders. Yet, what drew him here was not diplomacy, nor imperial intrigue, but the bewitching rumor of a vanished city, a city called Iram, whispered of in firelit gatherings and in inked lines of Holy Scripture. Stories reached him through the hesitant words of porters and merchants, of ruins glimpsed on the horizon, fragmented, half-dreamed, rumors that shaped his evenings into restless anticipation. The logistics alone were daunting. Thomas assembled a small caravan, a handful of hired men, laden camels, and supplies portioned so precisely that one mistake could spell disaster. Step by painstaking step, they crossed the border from Salalah and set their faces to the north. The desert scale engulfed them. Sunrises bled into sunsets with only the crunch of camel hooves and the subtle shifting whisper of sand to mark the passing of days. Each night, under a tapestry of stars, the men huddled around flickering coals, the boundary between their world and the ancient unknown blurring as exhaustion set in. Thomas, ever meticulous, scribbled notes by lantern light, seeing in his mind's eye those lost spires entombed beneath the dunes. Among Thomas's companions, Salem bin Kabina stood apart, dark-eyed, his skin weathered by sun and wind. Salem's presence radiated a quiet authority, his movements economical, his observations sharp. A lifelong denizen of the Rub al-Khali, Salim inherited a tradition of oral lore, epic poems, warnings, and tales that mapped the desert as surely as any compass could. He was guide, guardian, and intermediary between Thomas and the deeper mysteries of Arabia. As they melted into night, the tempo of conversation would slow. The caravan's pace allowed for the steady rhythm of stories told in low, steady tones to stave off fear and solidify kinship. Salem's voice was often no louder than the faint wind, weaving accounts of spirits that glided atop shifting sands and towers, glimpsed by the unlucky or the blessed. He spoke of his own grandfather, a man who returned from the heart of the desert delirious, convinced that he had looked upon pillars that reached the stars and should never have been seen by mortal men. For the Bedouin, stories of Iram were not meant to entice, but to serve as warnings. Salem's people believed the land remembered, and that curiosity was a temptation best denied. Yet, drawn by the foreigner's respectful listening and keen interest by the promise of gold, perhaps, or simply the loneliness that long journeys breed, Salim parted the curtain of legend. He spoke of places where compasses would not work, where the very air became thick with dread, and where even the boldest camel drivers feared to tread. Sometimes, mid-sentence, he would fall silent and look away, as if remembering that some knowledge ought never be shared. There were days in the desert when the wind itself became a living thing, snarling and wailing, clawing at exposed skin. The dunes, which by morning were gentle swells, would by afternoon become knife-like ridges, their lines sharp, their valleys deep and impenetrable. It was amid this ever-changing landscape that Thomas first glimpsed what he could only later describe as ghost towers. The conditions had been brutal, a burning noon, the air filled with suspended grit that sparkled and stung in the sunlight. The horizon shimmered as if a second sky had touched the earth. Then, through the haze, Thomas caught a glimpse. Vertical forms, evenly spaced, unnaturally pale against the darker sand, rising for a heartbeat and then vanishing as the wind shifted. Another man claimed to see angular shadows, shapes that seemed to move with the sand, as if a city beneath were pressing upward, hungry for recognition. Salim and the other guides fell anxious and quiet. Some crossed themselves, others whispered prayers against evil. Later, at camp, Thomas pressed for details. Was it ruins? A trick of the mind? A spirit's message? Salim only shook his head. What appears in the desert is real, even if it cannot be claimed. That night, Thomas could not sleep. He sketched what he remembered: tall columns, partly eroded, arranged in patterns that felt deliberate. The sketch would eventually end up in his private diary, a piece of evidence, or perhaps just a testament to the powerful forces of anticipation and suggestion at play. Thomas's journey took place not in isolation, but in the long shadow cast by another. T.E. Lawrence of Arabia remains one of the most enigmatic figures ever to set foot in Arabian sands. Diplomat, writer, warrior. Lawrence had a hunger for legends and an insatiable curiosity about the secrets of the desert. He too was drawn to whispers of Iram, convinced that the sands were sheltering more than they let on. Letters exchanged between Thomas and Lawrence reveal a friendship woven with rivalry, admiration, and subtle envy. Lawrence, haunted by his own failures and triumphs in the Arab revolt, found in Thomas's journey a kindred ambition, the one he never himself attempted. There was speculation, ever fueled by silence and half-expressed hints, that Lawrence intended to launch his own expedition to the Rub al-Khali, but his mysterious death struck down on a quiet English road put an end to such plans. For Thomas, the legacy of Lawrence was both inspiration and pressure. He knew that every decision, every small victory or setback, would be measured against the legendary exploits of Lawrence. Each step carried both personal doubt and the possibility of greatness, the sort that would echo through history, or just as easily disappear unremarked beneath the sand. The quest for Iram was never as simple as one lone explorer braving the elements. It was a contest of wills, cultures, and ambitions. In the years between global wars, a fever ran through the world of archaeologists and desert rats alike. The Middle East became a board of conquest, not only for empires, but for the minds and reputations of men like Thomas. Thomas's travels were shadowed by both overt and secretive rivals. The French, too, sent agents. German teams, sometimes with occultist interests, tried to read ancient texts and deployed mystical dowsers in the field. Each came with a desire to find, name, and claim whatever might be buried far from European eyes. A competition was subtle veiled threats, sudden funding problems, hired guides switching loyalties or getting lost en route, and persistent rumors of bribery. Yet none faced as many obstacles as Thomas from the local tribes. The desert was not an empty place, but a cherished homeland. Rumors of foreign explorers searching for gold, or worse, ancient power, stirred alarm. Thomas sometimes found his way blocked, a well closed off, or a caravan seized. His reports home were coded with caution, blending dry fact with illusion, so that only the most astute readers understood the stakes. Over time, certain patterns emerged in his notes, places described obliquely, landmarks left unnamed, observations seemingly contradictory. Whether this was mere prudence or a conscious effort to prevent plunder remains a subject of debate. To average eyes, the empty quarter might appear a wasteland, but for those who lived and traveled there, every hour was marked by the delicate balance between disaster and survival, and by moments of quiet awe. Water, not gold, was the true treasure, and every day began with a careful rationing of dusty jugs, a routine of patience and persistence. The rhythm of their lives became synchronized with sun and shadow, with each dawn a negotiation between endurance and hope. There was danger ever present and silent in the form of shifting dunes that could trap and suffocate, in the hint of spoiled water that could render a man helpless in the sudden violence of sandstorms that blotted out the world. One evening, Thomas's party stumbled on a half-buried trail, the remains of an old caravan route with scattered bones and pottery fragments, a reminder that many before had tried and failed. Yet amid adversity, there were moments of grace. Birds overhead, their flight marking the promise of water. A blooming flower, impossibly resilient. The taste of fresh dates shared under a sky embroidered with the Milky Way. Thomas described such moments in his journals, not with drama, but with a gentle wonder. He wrote of how silence deepened here, so complete it seemed almost sacred, a void in which one's breathing would become loud, one's heartbeat almost musical. On particularly windless nights, even the murmured prayers of his companions sounded as though they might echo forever. The men developed a synchronized rhythm, a constant struggle for survival. Yes, but also a ceaseless wonder at the world around them. They watched the movement of tiny insects, followed the old tracks left by each previous traveler, and tried to decipher the subtle changes in the color of the sand. One shade meaning safety, another hinting at dry wells beneath or old trade routes lost to time. Rarely, as dawn approached, mirages would appear on the cool horizon, shimmering lakes where none existed, silhouettes of ruined columns or domed roofs flickering at the edge of sight, vanished by the time the first tea was poured. These illusions, so persistent, so lifelike, became a part of Thomas's own myth-making. Each one was logged in his notebooks with dry precision. Unusual optical effect observed at 4:20 a.m. Possible pillars in the far southwest, but no confirmation. The blend of hardship and wonder defined these desert days, weaving together struggle and discovery in every measured footstep. One night stands out in Thomas's recollections, with a quality almost dreamlike in its quiet uncanniness. An advancing sandstorm, heralded by a slow, deepening roar, forced the caravan to take refuge in a shallow depression his guides reluctantly identified as cursed ground. It was known to locals as the mouth of an old well or the roof of a buried chamber, believed to have belonged to no ordinary village, but to the accursed Iram itself. Salim, normally calm, warned the British explorer about camping there. Yet, faced with exhaustion and the sand-choked wind, Thomas insisted. As dusk fell, the men built a low windbreak from tattered canvas and driftwood, and the camels, restless and snorting, clustered together uneasily. That night was cold, a cold that seemed to radiate from below as much as above. The wind's voice grew mournful, echoing within the shallow dip. Thomas, unable to sleep, ventured a short distance from camp, the sand crunching differently under his boot slider, with a thin resonance suggesting hollow, empty spaces beneath. He stood, eyes closed, and listened. From the silent dunes, he felt, or imagined, a low vibration, subtle but persistent, a rhythm like breath or the pulse of something sleeping. The camels had to be calmed repeatedly, and Salim whispered old incantations, insisting that spirits moved below their feet. Thomas sat for a long time, waiting for the feeling to pass. He would later write in his diary, a night in which the wind moved not just above, but through the earth, a sense of ancient, patient waiting. Iram's presence, palpable but unseen. Every explorer carries a record, sometimes for praise, sometimes as insurance against misunderstanding, sometimes as a confessional. Bertram Thomas's journals became all three. In his careful looping script, he mapped their route, described the landscape, and catalogued his findings, but also included stray thoughts and dreams too delicate for official reports. Here, Thomas recorded descriptions of geometrical alignments revealed at sunset, of worked stones with inscriptions of an unfamiliar hand, and of aligned post holes in the sand, suggesting far larger structures now vanished beneath the surface. One passage spoke cryptically of stones that hum in the twilight, marking something beneath. Some entries he later scratched out, fragments impossible to reconstruct, as if a later fear prompted their careful removal. Notably, he described an encounter with an artifact of unusual hardness, cut with an expertise unfamiliar even to Salim. It was shaped like a tablet, its surface smooth, etched in looping characters reminiscent neither of Arabic nor any known writing in the region. This object, he noted, would provoke questions best left unasked. In the final version of his published book, these enigmatic discoveries were absent. Only in the private diaries, which still exist in the British Library's vault, does the full magnitude of his wonder and uncertainty continue, inviting gentle speculation. What had he found that he could not say aloud? When Thomas's expedition finally emerged from the empty sweep of the Rub al-Khali, their arrival was met with subdued interest in British officialdom. The full details of his journey, maps, artifact notes, stories of shifting stone columns and breathless nights, were submitted quietly. For a brief time, Thomas gave public lectures, sharing sanitized versions of his desert odyssey. Yet much went unsaid. Plans for further expeditions were assembled and then canceled. Occasionally, a reference would appear in a confidential memo. Thomas's site, coordinates withheld due to political sensitivity. British authorities, ever cautious about potential instability, seemed to discourage publicity about oddities or discoveries that might spark a gold rush or religious fervor. Simultaneously, the Bedouin tribes became less helpful to outsiders, passing down warnings cloaked in myth. Salim bin Kabina, Thomas's invaluable guide, faded into tribal obscurity. Inquiries made years later were met with silence, his whereabouts unknown, his cooperation never again offered. Whether this was from fear or simply a return to the rhythms of Bedouin life is unknown. A feeling of unfinished business hangs over these events, a radio silence that feels less like forgetfulness and more like a deliberate closing of the book. Yet the question lingers. Did Thomas see more than he told? Or did the weight of myth and expectation simply press his notes into ambiguity? As you drift near sleep, consider this enduring enigma. What precisely did Bertram Thomas discover? In the centuries since, no explorer has emerged with proof as tangible or accounts as quietly compelling. Was his city never meant to be found merely a sand-driven hallucination, a mirage conjured by hope and hardship, or was it a real glimpse? A brief parting of the desert's ancient veil exposing a city lost to time? Thomas's own words, spared of drama but heavy with meaning, speak softly. There, amid the unending sands, I glimpsed a city never meant to be found. The ambiguity, the careful hedging of his words, reverberates gently to this day. Perhaps in the end, this is the truest form of mystery, the kind that persists not because it is forever unsolved, but because every answer slips back beneath the sands, ready to be rediscovered or reimagined by the next dreamer, the next seeker, the next gentle listener lulled by the vastness of the desert night. Now, as Thomas's story settles in the soft depths of memory, let us drift farther still beyond diaries and mortal footprints toward the unseen heart of the sands themselves, where ancient walls might yet remain, dreaming beneath the surface. Picture the early 1990s, satellites orbiting high above, quietly unraveling Earth's mysteries from the cold reaches of space. In 1992, scientists and archaeologists, acting on a mix of Bedouin tales and Western curiosity, turned their gaze to the Rub al Khali with cutting-edge technology. What the human eye could not see beneath centuries of sand, the instruments could. Deep trails faded into infinity, converging on a single spot. This was a convergence not natural, but deliberate ancient tracks made by countless feet and hooves, once linking the kingdoms of Arabia with the fabled lands of the Mediterranean. Here, at a point now known as Shisr in the Sultanate of Oman, they found more than desert, a pattern in the ground, an echo of lost commerce, and then the first stones. The site would come to be called Ubar, hailed by many as the long-lost Iram of legend. At first, it was a mirage brought real, a buried fortress rising from the sand's embrace. The archaeologists, led by Nicholas Clapp and local Omani teams, uncovered walls and towers collapsed into gaping sinkholes, like the vanished teeth of a beast. Each stone, worn smooth by time yet carefully placed, spoke of a society organized, powerful, and then suddenly gone. The mood at the dig was reverent and subdued. The city that had haunted dreams for millennia was, it seemed, more than just a story. To truly understand a desert city, you must begin with water. At Ubar, the most astonishing discoveries were not the collapsed towers, but the evidence of life's lifeblood. A massive ancient well, broad enough to water caravans of hundreds, cut deep into bedrock centuries before. Around this well, archaeologists uncovered the remains of an intricate irrigation system. A network of underground channels, stone aqueducts, and sediment traps. Even now, when the sun slants low and the sand's heat cools, you can walk among these channels and trace with your hand the grooves worn by generations of jars and ropes. This mastery of water was Iram's secret and oasis, conjured where none should exist. It was both a marvel and a curse. As the underground network dried up, or as the earth shifted, the city's fortune became its undoing. The last water stained the sand, evaporated beneath glaring skies, and the city receded into legend, leaving nothing but the memory of what was possible. The wind above Ubar's ruins is relentless. Each gust rearranges the surface anew, but it conceals a deeper history. Archaeologists, using ground-penetrating radar, sought to peer below the shifting sand. What they found was wondrous: a web of collapsed chambers, the remains of an elaborate underground city. It appeared, at first, as if a giant had pressed its hand upon the earth, indenting regular shapes deeper than any well. There were voids arranged in a circle, a dozen rooms once used for storage, council, or worship. There were hints of staircases, now leading nowhere, and a great central cavity beneath what once might have been a tower. Why did the city fall? The evidence points to catastrophe. The roof of a colossal limestone cavern, honeycombing the ground below, gave way beneath the weight of fortress and towers. The city's heart dropped into darkness, leaving the ruins exposed and abandoned. But beyond this accident, a sense of suddenness lingers. Stories etched into stone and sand, left unfinished and unsaid, as if the city vanished in a hushed instant. The region around Ubar thrived not in isolation, but as the anchor of the incense road, the arteries which carried frankincense and myrrh to Rome, Egypt, and beyond. Standing atop the broken walls, one can still imagine the distant clamor of traders, the soft thud of camels, the clipped voices bargaining under awnings, the fragrance of resin wafting through the early morning mist. Satellite mapping revealed ancient tracks fanning out for hundreds of miles, converging always at this lonely junction. Each route, lined with smaller way stations and shallow graves, testifies to the risks and rewards of desert trade. Here, merchants exchange not just goods, but news, faith, and dreams, a symphony of cultures, spoken in every tongue from Greek to Sabaean. These trade networks, maintained for centuries, turned Ubar into a city of wealth and temptation. The stones of the walls, marked with graffiti and prayer, tell not only of commerce, but of the deep solitude that followed its collapse. And so, as the incense trails faded, so did the city, abandoned not in fire or war, but in a slow turning away, a forgetting. Among the excavated ruins, one detail surfaces again and again: the pillars. Ancient writers, both Arabic and Greek, described Iram as the city of lofty pillars, so unique in its design that none could rival it. Stone columns, carved with a precision both geometric and austere, dotted the great halls and perimeters. Most had fallen, but their stumps remained rooted in place, determined sentinels challenging the wind. These columns served many purposes, some as boundaries, others as the foundation for arched roofs or observation points. In the innermost sanctuaries, archaeologists found hints of star alignments, openings in the stonework that framed certain constellations at solstice, suggesting a union of architecture and ancient sky watching. What stories do these pillars whisper? The marks chiseled into their sides, almost erased by centuries, show a blend of influences: South Arabian, Persian, and even classical touches from far-off Rome and Alexandria. Each tells, in silent testimony, of a place at the crossroads, both defensible and open, sacred but bustling. In the pale half-light just after dawn, you can almost see the outline of the original city, columns reaching skyward, defying the inevitability of time. For generations, Ubar's fortune depended on the ceaseless ebb and flow of travel, the rhythm of arrival, rest, and departure. Excavations uncovered the remains of vast caravanseries, the hospitable inns and courtyards where traders, Animals and goods could recuperate before the next long stretch crossed the dunes. Remnants of low stone walls, hearths blackened by countless meals, and scattered beads and weights tell stories of bustle and exchange. Pottery shards, stamped with symbols from far-flung places, and tiny glass pendants confirm that those who passed through hailed from distant empires, each leaving a whisper of their world behind. What might it have felt like to sleep in such a place? Imagine yourself nestled among the mingled aromas of camel leather and spice, listening to the quiet breathing of companions and the distant howling wind. Caravanseries were more than lodging. They were libraries of stories, places where tales of triumph and failure, love and loss were traded almost as eagerly as frankincense and gold. Geologists, working with historians, discovered the city's tragic flaw. Beneath Ubar, the limestone bedrock was riddled with caverns, formed eons earlier by ancient streams. This network supported the ever-thirsty city until the day it did not. At some unknown hour, perhaps overnight, the ground yawned open. Towers and walls, so carefully built, toppled inward, vanishing into sudden craters. The site's largest collapse, many meters deep, gave a mythic ending to a mythic city, a sinkhole wide enough to swallow an entire settlement, leaving nothing but shattered stone, tilted at odd angles, and the silence of abandonment. For the local tribes, this geological event was both explanation and omen, proof to their minds of divine retribution. Archaeologists marked the collapsed sections, mapping the fracture lines, finding, heartbreakingly, personal items, beads, tools, toys, all caught in the fall. A final echo of lives changed in an instant. The story of Iram became, through science and folklore alike, a lesson. Greatness and hubris, always balanced at the edge of the unknown. Within Ubar's collapsed heart, archaeologists found evidence of profound ritual. Small altars, worn smooth by time and set apart from market spaces, suggested ceremonial life persisted even in decline. Clay lamps, fragments of idols, and votive statuettes clustered around sacred corners, hinting at a cosmology both familiar and strange. Tombs were discovered, tucked discreetly into the shadow of fallen towers. Simple stone boxes for the powerful, shallow sand graves for the rest. Some bore markings in undeciphered script or stylized animals, motifs found nowhere else in Arabia, an artistic signature that sets Iram apart. Excavated grave goods, amber beads, delicate tools, scraps of silk, all spoke of lives steeped in both spirituality and everyday effort. It's tempting to imagine the chants and processions that may have wound through these streets, smoke rising, bells chiming softly in the dusk, prayers whispered for the city's survival. Even now, as archaeologists step carefully among the broken stones, there is a sense of trespassing among memories that have long outlasted voices. In the heart of these ruins, there lingers a gentle reverence, a sensation, subtle but distinct, that this was once a place of great ceremony, a junction between the earthly and the divine. As dusk fades and the air cools, shadows stretch across broken altars, and the hollowed eyes of ancient idols seem almost to follow passers-by. Archaeologists tread quietly, whispering their findings as if not to disturb the rest of those who sleep in sand-shrouded tombs. Now and then, a bead or amulet emerges from its sandy womb, glinting in the sun after centuries of darkness. A message, perhaps, from Iram's forgotten artisans. Each funerary site tells a story not of kings alone, but of communities. Workers, children, craftsmen, priests. Life followed its slow, repetitive rhythm. Birth, toil, worship, and grief, until interrupted suddenly by catastrophe. And yet, the depth of ritual presence suggests a city not only destined for commerce, but for continuity, built upon beliefs deep enough to imprint themselves upon stone and memory alike. The architects of Iram, it appears, designed more than defensive towers and marketplaces. Modern surveys, using both drone imagery and astronomical software, have revealed an uncanny precision in the orientation of major avenues and open spaces. Certain axes point not randomly, but align to the rising points of significant stars. Sirius Aldebaran, perhaps even the long-departed pole star that guided ancient caravans by night. Openings in temple walls and columned courtyards frame the horizon where the sun rises or sets on solstice days, suggesting the rhythm of the city's life was regulated as much by the sky as by the earth. It is believed by scholars and astrologers alike that such alignments may have governed festival calendars, harvests, or royal ceremonies. The placement of wells, too, sometimes mirrors the branching of constellations above a subtle blueprint, as if the city itself were a reflection of the heavens. As you imagine this, not in rushed detail, but as a gentle unfolding, picture priests or ancient astronomers standing beneath the vast Arabian sky, their robes shifting softly in the midnight breeze, marking the procession of distant lights, keeping cosmic time, even as the sands below their feet shifted restlessly. Not all those drawn to Iram's mystery are content with the steady crawl of archaeology and careful translation of pottery shards. From the moment news of the city's discovery reached the outside world, the more fanciful fringe writers, dreamers, and seekers of the strange have spun their own theories. Some suggest, with breathless certainty, that Iram was not of this earth, but a settlement of ancient astronauts, its geometric precision and advanced well systems evidence of knowledge received from the stars. Others weave together the legend of Atlantis, positing that Ubar is not just Arabia's buried city, but a surviving outpost of that primordial paradise sunk beneath mythical seas, a glint of universal truth hiding in plain sight beneath the dunes. Still others, conspiracy-minded researchers and treasure hunters, insist the British or other powers spirited away secret relics, metallic tablets, crystal skulls, or instructions for harnessing forgotten energies. They speak of great vaults sealed beneath the sand where treasures and perhaps something far stranger wait in silence, their truth protected by both legend and quicksand. There is a comfort even in these tales. They remind us that the mystery endures, not simply because we lack evidence, but because, perhaps, some enigmas are meant to remain softly unresolved, to lull us, as stories always do, into that twilight space between waking certainty and dreamlike wonder. As we leave these sands and their spectral cities, let your thoughts drift gently between the real and imaginary. Ahead awaits our measured examination, a closing lull of what science can explain and where legend, ultimately, is content to linger. Let us return once more to the sea of sand, to the Rub al-Khali. Its immense tranquility belies the restless movement beneath, a slow tide that shapes and reshapes both landscape and memory. Scientific study reveals the desert's dunes as living archives, recording and then erasing the traces of human presence. Over hundreds, even thousands of years, wind covers ancient walls, breaks pottery, swallows whispered stories whole. With every sunrise, the land becomes both palimpsest and blank slate, a constant struggle, as if nature itself is a quiet curator, deciding which fragments to keep in view. Geologists explain how droughts and climatic shifts, far more than wrath or curse, may have driven even the most resilient city to abandonment. Invisible rivers beneath the sand, once feeding deep wells, can vanish suddenly when tectonic forces shift or rainfall ceases for generations. The collapse of Ubar into limestone hollows is not just a poetic ending, but a common fate in this thirsty country. Thus, what feels to us like a sudden act of divine erasure is, in the Earth's time, a slow, humming inevitability. Archaeologists, with methodical hands and calm deliberation, have cataloged Ubar's stones, potsherds, and relics. Carbon dating, stratigraphy, and analysis of trade goods anchor Iram's legacy in the first millennium BCE to early centuries CE, fitting it into the known age of incense trade. DNA, from bones, textile patterns, and the design of precious beads, link its vanished people to tribes and merchants from all corners of the ancient Near East. But for all their meticulous effort, so much remains unresolved. Scripts scratched into stone resist translation. Ceramics appear suddenly, their design unmatched by neighbors. Some sites show evidence of sudden flight, a domestic fire unfinished, or a child's toy lost mid-play. Did the city have warning of its end? Did its people migrate, or simply merge into wandering tribes, letting the city fade from living memory? Science answers much, but always, at the periphery, the shadows of uncertainty linger. The legend of Iram comes to us not just through buried walls, but embedded in a lineage of storytelling respected for centuries. In the Quran, Iram is described as Iram of the lofty pillars, the like of which was not created in the land. Here, the city symbolizes arrogance and excess, a warning of fleeting earthly power and of the price paid for forgetting humility. Arabic poetry, folk songs, and tales told by wandering bards keep Iram alive, retelling how towers were glimpsed beneath storm clouds, or how the wind itself became a voice bearing secrets. Each storyteller adapts the myth to their age. For some, Iram's fall is a lesson. For others, an inspiration, a beckoning, always distant. The myth becomes a comfort, an explanation for the inexplicable, a frame in which to place personal and collective loss. Even in the absence of facts, the yearning for Iram is itself a kind of evidence that people remember, hope, and dream, often in spite of what is lost. If Iran is the Atlantis of the sands, what unites these stories? Atlantis, El Dorado, Shambhala, Hyperborea. Each tale emerges from different cultures, yet all grapple with a singular idea, that there are cities too beautiful and proud, too advanced or celestial in nature, to survive ordinary time. Plato's tale of Atlantis mirrors Iram's in structure, an otherworldly city punished by higher powers. The motif recurs across continents: flood, collapse, erasure, serving as mirror and warning across generations. Could such stories be cultural fossils, preserving the memory of real places lost to climate, war, or disaster? Modern analysis suggests that all great civilizations leave behind not only ruins, but yearning, a persistent ache for what has vanished. It is here, in this ache, that legend and memory gently entwine. The factual and the fantastical become companions, lulling listeners into a state where certainty and dreamfulness become indistinguishable, their boundaries softened like distant dunes in a twilight haze. History often slips from record not through violence, but through neglect or deliberate silence. Ubar's memory faded for both practical and political reasons. Empires rose and fell, and the center of commerce drifted away with changing routes. Colonial governments, wary of local unrest or the fever for lost treasures, sometimes downplayed discoveries. Local tribes, protective of their sacred sites and traditions, guarded secrets with silence, telling only select fragments to outsiders. Even in modern times, the instability of borders and suspicion of excavation means vast tracts of the desert remain unexplored. Official records are sparse. Oral histories shift and fade. The sand, gentle and patient, covers all. In a way, forgetting becomes one of the city's defenses. Each attempt to uncover the past provokes new stories, layered upon old, ensuring the heartbeat of Aram continues quietly beneath the surface. Scientific method and faith traditions often seem at odds, yet both yearn for understanding. On one hand, laboratory analysis and satellite imaging reveal how Aram could have flourished, setting the boundaries of what is plausible. On the other, faith provides meaning to the unexplained, a reason for why the city's demise could feel not just random, but fated. For many in the region, Aram will always be more than a historical site. It is a sign, a warning, and a comfort. Bedouin guides cross themselves or whisper prayers as they describe its fate, their beliefs wrapping gently around archaeological finds like a silken shroud. Science may erode some stories, but always, space remains for what cannot yet be explained, and for the slow, generational process of reconciliation between the seen and unseen. The re-emergence of Ubar from centuries of oblivion is itself a profound event for history. It reminds us of the limits of certainty and the resilience of mystery. With every new find, every collapsed well, every inscription unearthed, a fuller picture of ancient Arabia appears, correcting assumptions and exposing the gaps between our knowledge and the lived reality of centuries past. The city's rediscovery invites humility. How many more eons lie beneath the world's deserts, jungles, or oceans? How many stories wait patient in the dark, their truths obscured by sand or sea or our own forgetfulness? The maps of tomorrow are never truly finished. Each find is not an answer, but an invitation to imagine, to ask gently, what else might be lost? What greatness remains just out of sight, shifting beneath the rhythms of our own time? Perhaps at last, we see why some stories refuse to rest. A mirage beautiful, ever just out of reach, offers not disappointment, but a promise, the certainty that there is more. The sand holds fragments of cities, yes, but the heart holds the pattern of longing, the soft pull to seek, to wonder, to believe that every mystery contains truth, even if its full shape is never revealed. To those who listen, the wind over Aram's ruins carries a lullaby, a slow, patient rhythm, ancient and kind, whispering, "Let the unanswered remain. Let the lost be gently mourned and quietly celebrated." It is enough, even soothing, to drift between clarity and uncertainty, between the rare discovery and the ever-present dream. As our journey nears its close, shift focus back to yourself. You rest not in tents pitched into shifting sand, but in the security of the present. Your breath is steady, your days ordered, your nights punctuated not by the wild wind, but by warmth and quiet. The rhythms of struggle and survival that defined Iran for you are distant echoes. Yet there is connection through curiosity, through the ancient spark of wanting to know and to remember. The comfort of your bed, the softness of your pillow, the dim glow of the room, all provide gentle contrast to the city that sleeps under sand. In this moment, let that contrast lull you ever deeper toward rest. The past is troubled, beautiful, mysterious. Here, in the aftermath, you inherit only its softer lessons. So, as the night deepens, and the sands of the empty quarter grow cold under the moon, the forbidden city stirs only in memory. Let the centuries of longing and forgetting wash over you. For even as science and story meet at the golden boundary between what is known and unknown, the secret of Iram endures, and with it the quiet promise of more, waiting to be found. What we remember, what we forget, and what we hope to discover, all blend together in the world's great, timeless lullaby. If one city could vanish for 1,000 years, shielded by nothing but legend and drifted sand, just imagine, with gentle wonder, how many worlds lie waiting, hidden in shadow, cradled by time, for the next dreamer to awaken. So you have gently walked the winding desert paths, past myth, through memory, and into the softly pulsing heart of mystery. The tale of Iram, the forbidden city lost beneath centuries of shifting sand, floats now around you like a light desert breeze. It is neither confirmed nor denied. Its pillars rise and fall in the space between fact and dream, as all legends do when night has deepened and the world grows still. Let go, for a time, of questions and answers. There is a peace in knowing that the past is not a point to be conquered, but a horizon to be admired, a line where memory and imagination hold hands beneath the stars. In your mind's eye, the dunes stretch on forever, crested with sleeping secrets that wait patiently for the sun, or for wandering storytellers and curious dreamers. Consider the resilience of humanity, of empire, explorer, and wanderer alike. Under the eternal sky, people chased hope, outlasted hardship, loved and lost, built with care, and remembered with longing. Cities may fall, towers may vanish beneath the weight of time, but the impulse to wonder survives. It leads us from comfort to curiosity, from hearth to horizon, and when we return, tucks us gently back into the warmth of our own beds. Breathe deeply now. Feel how safe you are, how removed from the sharp wind, and the relentless sun, wrapped instead in silence, broken only by the familiar, soothing sounds of the present. If your eyes are growing heavy, let them close, and allow the ancient lullaby of desert sands to cradle you further. Each era, each forgotten city, brings a gentle assurance. Though monuments collapse and legends are rewritten, the rhythm of our own lives, steady and kind, continues. As the last grains of ancient sand settle in your thoughts, remember that not all mysteries exist to be solved. Some, like the story of Iram, are best cherished softly, left to melt into the edges of sleep, where wonder is prized above certainty. So, drift now through time, through endless dunes, through the golden echoes of forgotten glory, carried by the slow and silent wind, toward dreams of cities waiting just beneath the surface, as restful and enduring as sleep itself. Good night.